Welcome to the Emerald City Sportscast.
Wilson, as he throws deep downfield. It's going to be caught by Metcalf for the touchdown.
Hosted by longtime Northwest sports journalist Dan Viennes.
Here's a drive deep to left. He has done it again. Wow. Kyle Lewis, 3 games, 3 home runs. Mariners have a 5-2 lead.
Brought to you by Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio. World-class audio recording right in the heart of the Woodinville Winery District.
Wide receivers to either side. Russell takes the snap, drops back. He's going to throw down the middle. He's got a man. The ball is caught.
Game over, baby.
Touchdown. The game is over. The Seahawks are going back to the Super Bowl.
And now, broadcasting live from the Dan Cave Studios, here's your host, Dan Viennes.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Emerald City Sportscast. I say that because I've been gone for a couple of weeks. Always seems to happen around this time of year. There's a lot leading up to the NFL draft. And this offseason in particular for the Seahawks was pretty exhausting. As a fan, as someone who covers the team, analyzes the team, just the whole Russell Wilson drama, and then just a really active offseason. You know, I'm not talking about bad things. You know, if you've ever seen that list of like 20 most stressful things, that can happen in a person's life, some of those are good things, right? Marriage, buying a new house, things like that, but they're stressful. And this was a stressful Seahawks offseason. The Russell Wilson drama, all the player moves, new offensive coordinator, lots of change, more than we're used to, which definitely will impact what's on the field. It's also been a little stressful being a Mariner fan too, right? They get off to the good start. Start that, was surprisingly good and nobody was expecting and nobody should have expected anyway. If you caught my last appearance on the Seahawks Playbook podcast with Keith and Bill just after the draft, if you saw the YouTube video, you saw like the bonus footage at the end after we technically signed off. And they asked me about the Mariners. Are the Mariners for real? And I kind of laughed. I mean, it's sort of a ridiculous question, but it points out the fact that there are still, I always see the fan base as a bell curve, right? If you can picture a bell curve, and at one extreme end are people who don't give a shit, and they just don't care. They're not fans. And then you have the people at the other end that represent a small portion of the fan base that are really, really into it, emotionally invested, spend their days thinking about the team, talking about the team, stressing about them when they're not doing well, feeling better about life when they are. I mean, I'm definitely in that group, right? People that podcast about them, cover the team, just diehard fans. I know some of them in my life. They're the people that I text and call on a daily basis. Then in the middle, the main crux of the Mariner fan base are what you would call the casual fan. And this is not a criticism in any way, shape, or form. It's just kind of reality. They're people that casually follow the team, and that lends itself to being fair weather and bandwagon. And when things are going well, it's easy to be a fan. And it's fun to be a fan, but it's easy. It's when you're a diehard fan like me, you take a lot of crap. I have to personally defend the Mariners when people find out I'm a fan. I've dealt with that my whole life. Seahawks went through many, many periods in their existence where it was like that. Certainly being a Coug, someone who went to Washington State, was involved in the athletic program through the broadcasting department there and is still a loyal Coug to this day. I've had to deal with that from all angles. What I'm here today to do is I think try to appeal to some of that bell curve, the big fat part in the middle, and address some questions. Kind of take the temperature of the rebuild and put things in perspective and context, because we lose that in sports. We lose that, and I have a theory about that I'll get into in a minute, why that is. Why we all not just want to be a winner overnight, that's human nature. We want our teams to win. But to think that they can, that's different. And we're going to get into that a little bit. I want to address 5 questions, basically. The Mariners are in a very poor stretch right here. There's no denying that. The offense has been hard to watch. You know, they went through a stretch where, twice in 13 days they were no hit? Not the first team to do that, but it's pretty select company. And they just snapped a 6-game losing streak last night in Oakland. And there was some pretty cool stuff that contributed to that win. Here are the 5 questions. I'm going to address what's wrong, who's to blame, because that seems to be a very popular question and something people like to do daily. Where do they go from here? Are there signs of hope? And is the rebuild still on track? So let's start with that first one. What's wrong? And this is really the basis of my attempt to try to put this in perspective for people who might be wondering, God, they got off to that good start. They were 3-4 games above 500. They were in the race in the West and coming up with timely hits and just enough offense. The pitching was great. Same old Mariners. Here we go again. What's wrong? Injuries, first of all. Not the only reason. Just the pitching staff alone. James Paxton, what did he last? 24 pitches into his first start? He was a massive acquisition in the offseason and showed in his 2 spring starts after his visa issues were cleared up that he could be, when healthy, that dominant frontline left-handed starting pitcher again. Imagine what a difference that makes. Then Marco Gonzalez had a shaky start. Then it started to look like the Marco of old. A guy that's never going to be a number 1 starter, probably never going to be an all-star. That's tough to say because all you have to do to be an all-star these days is have a good first half. But a real steady presence in that rotation. He goes down. Nick Margavicius goes down. He was a real valuable swing man, and then he took that starting spot for Paxton when he went down. And then on offense, Kyle Lewis didn't hit the field for the first few weeks, and then clearly had some rust to knock off when he did come back. Ty France was the best hitter in the Mariners lineup the first few weeks of the year. Goes down with an injury, has to miss some time. Evan White still out. Jake Fraley, who had a really nice spring, would have been your 4th outfielder, could have been a guy that could have provided some punch during this offensive drought. He's just now on a rehab. Should be back soon. Shed Long, haven't seen him all year. A guy that is known as kind of a square peg, round hole defensively. Not really sure where he belongs. Can he play second base every day, or do you just move him around? But a guy that was known as a hitter. It's a pretty good list right there, right? And I know every team in baseball is dealing with pitchers or with injuries, particularly pitching staffs. You have to wonder if the shortened season last year really threw some of these guys' training regimens off because the injuries all around baseball. Pretty remarkable. I saw a stat the other day. I think the Mariners have used 11 starting pitchers so far this year. The Dodgers are right there with them. You know, that's a team that a lot of people think has the best roster in baseball. The injury bug has affected everyone for the most part. But there have been some poor performances too. Kyle Lewis really still hasn't heated up since he came back from injury. Evan White wasn't hitting, of course. The catching position has been especially bad. Luis Torrens really never got going. Tom Murphy doesn't look anything like the guy that we saw in 2019 that we got so excited about. and the young guys. Jared Kelenic, when he came up, had the great second game, went 3 for 4, 2 doubles and a home run, and then he went like 0 for a week. Had the home run last night, though, after a day off. But he looks like a young guy facing Major League pitching for the first time after only having a few at-bats at AAA. So a little side note here for those of you who have been screaming about service time issue and how bogus the Mariners have treated Kelenic. I mean, he missed half of spring training, and he's never faced AAA pitching. And he only had a couple hundred at-bats in AA. He's showing that now. He's really validating the Mariners' not reluctance, but their patience with choosing the time to bring him up. There are some holes on the roster, for sure. That's another reason. They went into this season really with no backup plan at first base. Jose Marmoleos, not a Major League Baseball player. They finally acknowledged that, designated him the other day, cleared waivers. That should tell you all you need to know. He's back in Tacoma. They needed another outfield bat or a guy that could play infield, little second, maybe some third, maybe some left field, but just somebody in the lineup that could lengthen it, balance out the lineup, be a veteran presence, stabilize the offense while the young guys adapt, take pressure off of them. They needed to do that. They didn't. So to my second question, who's to blame? This is what everybody likes to do. They want to blame. They want accountability. And the Mariners have been easy targets over the years. I get it. John Stanton deserves criticism. He deserves all the criticism you can muster, not only for Kevin Mather, for not firing him 7 years ago when he should have been fired, for promoting him after that, and then for allowing a non-baseball guy and a narcissist to dictate baseball policy. And this is important. This is a really important point, because it leads to my next one, which is, how much blame does Jerry Dipoto get? If you listen to Twitter, I guess you can't listen to Twitter. If you read Twitter, he should be fired. That's what most fans think. That middle of the bell curve. Clearly, he's an idiot. Can't build a winning team. He's made mistakes. The biggest mistake he made, now follow me on this, the biggest mistake Dipoto has made, because largely since late 2018 when he started this rebuild, pretty flawless. We've gone over that before. You can go listen to old episodes of mine or check out my appearance when I visited with Jason Churchill on Baseball Things on his great podcast. That's out there. I'm not going to go over all that again. About how unbelievably adept Dipoto has been at working trades and working this process through. His biggest mistake he's made so far, though, is at the end of last season when he made that bold prediction, when he came out and said, we think we can challenge for a playoff spot in 2021. But, there's a big but on this one. He said that because at the time he was led to believe by ownership that he'd be able to add payroll this offseason. He believed he would be able to make a couple of moves to strengthen the roster. He wasn't saying, I think Jared Kelenic and Logan Gilbert and Kyle Lewis are going to lead us to the playoffs next year. It's not what he was saying. At that time, he was led to believe he would have some payroll flexibility. And then it's been well documented since then with what happened to Mather and that Rotary meeting that he was in on, and the reporting done afterwards, that Mather convinced Stanton to change his mind and not spend money last offseason. I'm not trying to put this all on Mather. I'm just trying to say that pump the brakes a little bit on DePoto. Okay? But Stanton deserves the criticism. Is he a bad owner? I'll address that in a second, too. And DePoto tried, even with those restrictions he was handed. He tried. They were in on Colton Wong, but ultimately couldn't compete with the 2 years, $18 million the Brewers gave him. Imagine if Colton Wong had been playing second base every day in this lineup. He's hitting .287 with a .785 OPS with the Brewers. Good for about almost 1.5 wins against replacement so far this season. They tried signing Tommy La Stella, Brock Holt, a couple of guys like that, sort of end of the roster veterans. Neither of those guys would have made an impact. La Stella's hurt. Holt's hitting .235 for the Rangers. Who's to blame? Scott Service? That's a popular one. Maybe. I mean, here's my thought on Service. I don't think he's a great manager. But I also think there's only about 5 great managers in baseball, and the rest of them just kind of scuffle from game to game and figure it out. I think there's only about 5 or 6 really good strategists where you have a hard time night in, night out debating their strategic moves during a game. And you can cherry pick Scott Service to death. Pitching moves, criticizes in-game decisions. But Scott's value is and always has been in player development. That was his background. He'd never been a field manager before DePoto brought him here to do that. It's player development. I think that's where his career will end as well in the not-too-distant future. But I still believe he's the right guy for now. Because he has a mentality, he has the mindset, keep guys on an even keel through the ups and downs of the development process, to communicate with DePoto and the development staff on how players are doing. And players like playing for him. Even with what happened with Mather and Kelnick and that whole stuff right at the dawn of spring training, that clubhouse is solid. I still believe that Scott Service, when this team is about to crest, it's a word that Jerry DePoto likes to use, and become really good, I still think that they're grooming some young managers in the system. I think they hand it to someone else kind of from the analytical side of things, and Scott goes back upstairs. But we'll see. But the people, again, the middle of the bell curve, the people on Twitter that say, they screwed up, they should have hired a Dusty Baker or a Terry Francona, somebody like that. First of all, those guys aren't taking this job. They want $8 million a year, and they want a team that's ready to win now. One of the hardest parts of a rebuild is you have to find a manager willing to build with it. Those guys aren't doing it. Baker went to Houston instead of retirement because he knew he could win now. So you got to keep that stuff in perspective. Where do they go from here? To me, it's easy. You stay the course. The hardest part of the rebuild is right now. Sorry, I keep hitting my mic stand. This is the hardest part of the rebuild. The last 2 years were hard for fans, because we kept hearing about this minor league system as it was growing and momentum was really building, and they were moving from dead last in the major leagues in just about every minor league ranking system out there to first, second, third, depending on who you look at. We saw all that happening. We heard the names, but we don't get to see them. And then when we do get to see him, we expect Ken Griffey Jr. We expect instant success. That doesn't happen very often. It's very, very rare. Junior spoiled us. Think about the other great players we've had in our history, though. Edgar Martinez didn't really break through and become a solid major league player until he was almost 30. People want to give up on Logan Gilbert because he's had 2 rough starts. Starts again tonight. We'll look for small victories. We'll look for a step forward. But look all around baseball. There's examples of guys that started off, had it rough, put it together. It's the hardest game. Somebody asked me at work the other day, how come these players have to spend all these years in minor leagues? How come when they're great in high school, they're great in college, they can't just go to the major leagues and be great? It's the hardest sport in the world to do that because the difference between major league pitching and minor league pitching is so much greater than anything else we can think of in sports as far as the leap. If you're a great football player in college, the game isn't that different. It's a little bit faster, but you can adjust. Basketball, the same thing. Because everything is in your control. Basket's 10 feet. If you're a great shooter, all you have to really learn to adjust to is the intensity of the moment. Better athletes, sure, guys defending you. But the pitchers you face in college with an aluminum bat in your hand, or the pitchers you face in high school, nothing like the pitchers you face in the major leagues. It's very rare when these guys are great right out of the gate. Remember Lucas Giolito, 16th pick in the 2012 draft. Granted, it's not apples to apples here. Gilbert was a 4-year starter in college. Giolito was drafted out of high school. Gilbert, the 14th pick in 2018. Giolito debuted for the Nats, and then he was traded to the Sox. Made his debut in Washington, gave up 16 earned runs in 21 innings pitched, 12 walks to 11 strikeouts. Pretty bad. There's a commercial of him out there now. Can't even remember the product. Where he talks about that. I was the worst pitcher in baseball. Everybody, and you can hear the announcer, worst pitcher in baseball. And then he becomes an all-star. 2019 with the White Sox, 14-9, 3.41 ERA, 228 strikeouts and 176 innings pitched. Let me give you another line of a guy in his debut year. Came up as a rookie, much ballyhooed, best prospect in baseball. His rookie debut, 40 games, 123 at-bats, 30 strikeouts, a 24% K rate, hit .220 with 5 home runs and a .672 OPS. Does that sound like a superstar? And he got sent down again, all the way to Double-A because he was struggling before he made it back to the major leagues. That's Mike Trout. That was his whole rookie line. But in his first 12 games for the Angels, he hit 163. It's about what Kellenick's hitting today. So lighten up on that stuff, right? Because then the next year, Trout went out and hit 326 with 30 home runs. Stay patient. We hear this with rebuilds. Trust the process. And if you can't handle waiting, then just disengage. Detach for a while. But don't bitch about it on Twitter. And I teased this earlier, that I'd get around to my philosophy on this. Here's why I think people are so impatient. And they just ignore the logic and any rational thought related to how difficult it is to turn a losing team into a winning team, especially a losing team that had horrible contracts. Had one of the biggest albatross contracts in baseball history in Robinson Cano. They were sent a gift from the baseball gods that they were able to move him. But here's why I think people are impatient. The NBA has kind of ruined it for everyone. This idea that if you're not good enough one year, you just blow it up. You dump your whole roster and you go out and sign 3 max free agents. And you become good in 1 year. And then you blow it up again the next year. Fans have seen teams go from really terrible to really great. Wherever LeBron James goes, they win a championship, even if they stink the year before. We saw it in Houston. We saw it with Oklahoma City, certainly after they left here. We've seen it. We're seeing it now in New Jersey. It kind of stinks. It's one of the reasons I really don't like the NBA anymore, and I don't even know if I'll get excited about the Sonics when they come back because I don't like the product. Teams don't stay together, ever. That's another topic for another day. When we get the Sonics back, we'll definitely dive into that. But I think it and you can go even deeper into how people are just impatient in society now anyway, because anything we ever want is in our hand, on our phone, at the moment we want it, right? But the thing I don't get is if you're not willing to be patient and let the process play out, and you're not smart enough to understand that you can't just go sign free agents and become good in one offseason. Let's address that for a second. Because that's what a lot of fans, baseball fans, seem to think based on what I see on Twitter. Dipoto should have gone out and signed a bunch of guys this offseason so they'd be good, and then the pressure wouldn't be on the young guys. A free agent has to want to come here, and that's going to take a while. And you can convince players to come here with money, but then you're overpaying, and that's not smart either. But what I don't get, what I was trying to say, is when you combine those things, you're not patient enough as a fan to wait for the process to play itself out, and you're too unreasonable to understand that the idea of just going out and signing free agents to become good in one offseason isn't realistic, then why do you care enough to bitch about it? And it brings me back to one of my favorite sports stories ever. Sam Snead, the great old-time golfer, was playing in a Pro-Am one time. And the amateur hit a bad shot and got pissed and threw his club and was swearing, stomping around. Snead pulled him aside and said, "Son, I don't know why you're getting mad. You're not good enough to be mad." Some of these people bitching the most, yelling the loudest, complaining the most vehemently, don't care enough to get mad. I don't get it. I don't get it. So let's move on to the positive stuff, okay? Are there signs of hope? For those of you on the fence, all over the place. Almost everywhere, there are signs of hope. Even on the big league roster, which I wasn't going to talk about. I was going to focus mostly on the minor leagues. But let's talk about the big league roster. Look at last night. Kyle Lewis finally turned on a ball instead of trying to go the other way. Hit the ball 440 feet. It was a no-doubt home run. Maybe he's starting to get going. Kelnick cranked one deep to right field last night. Maybe he'll get going. And he had a leadoff walk. Ty France came back healthy last night for the first time in weeks. Hit a double. Guys are starting to come back. But let's just look at a couple of examples in the minor leagues. Reasons to have hope. Offensively, hitters. Taylor Trammell struggled his first month in the major leagues, right? After never playing in AAA himself. Since being sent back down to Tacoma, guy's hitting .500 with 5 home runs and 50 plate appearances. Just won AAA Minor League Player of the Year. We might see him back up here again soon. Noel De Marte, the 19-year-old shortstop, hitting .347 with 4 home runs in low A. Julio Rodriguez is killing high A. Just 20 years old, hitting .303 with 5 home runs. Probably isn't going to stay in Everett much longer. Zach Deloach, second-round pick last year with an .800 OPS. Cal Raleigh, 24-year-old switch-hitting catcher in Tacoma. triple slash of 310, 373, 586. That's a 959 OPS. And the thing I like, he's not trying to hit home runs every time. He's only got 2 long balls. His K rate's 16%. It's pretty good. He's playing good defense. I think we're going to see him soon. And when it comes to pitching, you'd be really hard-pressed to find even a middling Mariners pitching prospect who's not off to a great start. Wantane, he might be the one guy. But the list is so long of guys off to great starts, dominating. Pitchers we didn't get to see pitch last year at all. Isaiah Campbell, George Kirby, Emerson Hancock, the first-round pick of last year. Sam Carlson, finally healthy and back from Tommy John, has been dominant. Tim Elliott, Levi Stout, Matt Brash, Adam Macko. Brandon Williamson, the left-hander who's really starting to generate some buzz among scouts as maybe a guy out of that group that might come out on top. 26 strikeouts so far in 12 innings for the lefty. That Everett pitching staff is crazy. And if you think, oh, Everett, they're years away. Everett's not Everett anymore. It's not short season rookie league A ball anymore. It's high A. It's advanced A. And the only reason some of these guys are playing there is because they didn't get to play last year. They're not going to be there very long. This minor league system is loaded. Tim Kirkjian today in a radio interview said Julio Rodriguez is the best outfield prospect in baseball. Better than Jared Kelenic. And if it seems like they're far away, keep this in mind. And this is something that's a real key point to what I'm trying to get across here. The lost season last year in 2020, the lost development season might have hurt the Mariners more than any other team in baseball because of where they were in the process. The White Sox were kind of past it, and their best young guys had gotten to the Major League roster. Some of our best young guys didn't even end up at the alternate site last year because they weren't ready in case the Major League team needed them. Really hurt their development last year. I think they're going to be in 2022 where they should have been this year. I think a lot of these guys would have been in AA by now, if not for the pandemic. But because of that, I think they'll move fast. So that brings me to my last question, which is the rebuild on track? This is what everyone wants to know. And I say, yes, absolutely. But, again, there was a mistake made pinning a timeline to it. Even before he made the comment at the end of last season, Dipoto was trying to narrow it down. He would use timelines. We think by All-Star break of next year and the year after. He should have never done that. I know he was trying to keep fans engaged and keep them hopeful, but that was a mistake. But later this season, just to clarify some of the things that we were talking about earlier, over the next few months, you're going to see Cal Raleigh come up. He's the future at catcher and a guy who can hit in the middle of that lineup. You're going to watch Kelenic and Gilbert grow and get better at the Major League Baseball level. You're going to see Trammell come back up and take a step forward. We're going to see Julio and a bunch of those pitchers get to AA, which is one step away from the major leagues. Some of those guys might even finish the year in AAA. We're going to get Shed Long back, and you got to make a decision about him this year. I think it's kind of a make-or-break year for him. But he could add a spark. He's definitely a high-energy guy, and that'll be nice to have in that clubhouse alongside Kelenic. But his bat can help too. Haven't seen Andres Munoz yet. Haven't even mentioned him. He was a guy that came over as one of the 5 players in that San Diego Padres trade. Just 22 years old, throws 100 miles an hour when healthy, coming off Tommy John. Should be ready later this year. That bullpen's going to be back intact in a week after all the COVID quarantines, by the way. Justin Dunn continues to progress. Might be the best starting pitcher the Mariners have had this year so far. That's surprising to me and encouraging. His last 7 starts, a 3 ERA, strikeout per inning. Hopefully we'll see Justice Sheffield bounce back. Marco Gonzalez is set to be back in a couple of weeks. And 2022 is going to be a lot of fun. I think the second half of 2021 is going to be fun, watching a lot of those names that I just mentioned. But 2022, we could, at some point, we're going to see Kirby, Williamson, Rodriguez, going to be on the doorstep. Deloach should be close. Kelnick, Gilbert, Raleigh, more established. But here's the thing, and I talk about how we haven't reached the hardest part of the rebuild yet, for Dipoto anyway. I think it's this next coming offseason. It's not the following offseason when you might have the opportunity and the need to just go take a big swing after one big-time player. It's this next offseason. Some judgments are going to have to be made on players, some hard judgments. And then corresponding moves will have to be made. There's going to be some money to spend. Going to have to spend it wisely. Stanton's not just going to hand you an open checkbook and say, you can go to $200 million if you want to. That'd be stupid anyway. They opened the season this year with a $73.4 million payroll. That's 25th in baseball. There's only $30 million committed for 2022, but that's deceiving. That doesn't include, when you look up COTS contracts or Spot Track, they list it as $30 million because what they don't do is they don't list a salary for a Mitch Haniger because they don't know what it's going to be yet because he's going into the last year of arbitration. So look at it this way. If it's $73 million now, you can take Kyle Seager's number off of that next year if they don't exercise his option. I've said before on this show that I think they should. But there's flexibility there. For those of you rolling your eyes right now as you listen to this, because John Stanton, Mariner ownership, never spends. Well, they had a top 10 payroll before the rebuild. And John Stanton's different. Try to compartmentalize. Try to separate his blind spot that he had for Mather and the mistakes he made around that. What makes him different than Mariner owners of the past, and some people don't even know that there's a new owner. Again, at work the other day, somebody was blaming all this on the Nintendo owners who don't care, not knowing that they haven't owned the team for 5 years, 6 years. You know what John Stanton does first thing in the morning every day? Checks the box scores and the standings. He's a baseball fan. He's a Mariner fan. And I would even argue now there's more pressure this coming offseason on him to deliver as an owner because he knows he's not stupid. He's a very successful businessman. He keeps his ear to the ground. He knows the firestorm of criticism that he faced. He wants to fix that. So some really shrewd, smart decisions are going to have to be made this offseason. You're going to have to add a couple of players from the outside, and they're going to have to be the right players. Stanton has said on the record when the time is right, he'll spend. He let Mather talk him out of that this offseason, but that was a unique circumstance. I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass on that. Because a lot of things have been unique the last year and a half. I don't give him a pass. Don't get me wrong. Let me clarify. I don't give him a pass on letting Mather dictate the direction. But I'm saying I can see where they were in the rebuild. I could see him wanting to maybe pump the brakes on spending just yet. The mistake was telling Dipoto, hey, this is what we're going to do, and then changing course. That's poor leadership. One other point I'd like to make is this. For this 25-man roster, somebody asked, there was a poll this morning about how it was it was during the game yesterday. When when Swanson was in a little trouble in the 8th inning, allowed a couple base runners. Somebody put a poll on Twitter and said, hey, does it matter to you if they win this game or not? I would answer that in two ways. One is it always matters. You always want to win, even when the team's 20 games below 500. If it's ninth inning and 2 outs and runner on third and Mariners closers on the mound, I'm still sweating and excited and pumping my fist if they get that save. That's just part of being a fan. But it really doesn't matter. What matters is development of these kids. Does winning games help in their development? Sure. But the 25-man roster, and this kind of goes back to all the criticism on Dipoto lately. And I had a guy, I don't block people very easily on Twitter. In fact, sometimes I get into heated debates and then we end up finding some common ground and hey man, good debate. But I had a guy come after me for defending Dipoto with third grade sophomoric insults. It was stupid. But the main point I was trying to make is the 25-man roster isn't built to win. You can't judge Dipoto's ability as a GM on this 25-man roster. It's, to some degree, patchwork. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say 90% of his energy and focus is on player development system-wide. 10% of it is on the 25-man roster being a complete roster. Okay, the plan is a good one, all right? Mistakes have been made in the last 6 months, but the plan is a good one. A lot of hard work lies ahead. When the time comes to make those big choices on big additions from the outside, contract extensions, who you keep, who you move on from, manager, those things to put you over the top, that's going to be 2022 and 2023. And if you can't stomach that, if that isn't acceptable to you, if you think that sucks, it's the word that's thrown around way too easily, then baseball might not be for you. And being a Mariner fan certainly isn't for you. The NBA mentality doesn't work in baseball. Okay? Quick example. Mariners are only 2.5 years into this thing, right? The Houston Astros drafted George Springer in 2011, Carlos Correa in 2012. That's when their rebuild began. They didn't have their first winning season until 2015. And they didn't win the division until 2017. So try to be a little patient, okay? I think 2022, they have a legit chance with a good offseason to be a 500 team. And I think in 2023 is when this process will be judged. If this team is scuffling to get to 500 and getting no hit, in 2023, then decisions will have to be made organizationally. I think 2023 is when this thing is going to come to a head, and I think it's going to be successful. It's a bad stretch right now, but it will get better. Trust me. Now, in that context, what do you do about Kyle Seager and Mitch Haniger? Right? Seager got off to the great start, which is not typical for him. He usually heats up late after struggling early. He's got those 9 home runs, but he's cooled off the last few weeks. That average is all the way down to 230. Last 7 games, 208 with just 1 home run, 11 strikeouts. I've said before, $15 million for a good defensive third baseman who's an average major league hitter is worth about 3 wins against replacement. And he's making $15 million. You know the old formula, right? It's about $1 million for every 10th of a win. So if you're paying $15 million, you hope it's a 1.5 win player. He's closer to a 2.5 to 3 win player. So I still think it would make sense to bring him back next year. But a lot of that depends on what other guys do. Does the organization believe Ty France can play third base every day? What does Shed Long do in the second half? Do they think that money can be spent better elsewhere? Do they think they can go out on the free agent market and plug a guy in at third base that can be as effective as Seager for less money. We'll see. And I may be changing my mind on Mitch Haniger because it's become so clear that this team is another year and a half away, I think, from legitimately being good. Trading Mitch Haniger might make more sense. I've said before on this show, love the player, love the person. Performing on the field after 2 years lost to injury, 263, 13 home runs, and 877 OPS. Playing every day in right field. Good defensively. Great clubhouse guy. But he has a year and a half left at club control, and there's value in that. Not as much value as if they had moved him before all the injuries hit, obviously. But if you can get another significant piece or two to add, cheaper, longer club control to be part of this young core, I thought keeping a couple of veterans through the rebuild made sense, especially guys like Haniger, who are such stand-up guys. But if you get the right deal, it may make more sense to move him. I'll say this, though. If Seager has a solid season, if you trade Haniger, then I absolutely want to bring Seager back. I don't want to move on from both of them because I do think it's important to keep a couple of veterans through a rebuild like this. Let's talk some football. I haven't been with you since just before the draft, unless you listen to me on Keith and Bill's show, where we broke it all down afterwards. It's about a 2-hour episode. You can check that out on any podcast network or YouTube. I want to touch on the Seahawks briefly now that things have kind of settled, right? The roster's set. They may pick up a cap cut or something along the way, but I think it's set. I don't think KJ Wright's coming back unless there's an injury. Really, the only question is, where does Alden Smith stand? It's a weird situation. What's it been, 6 weeks since they signed him, and 2 days later he gets accused of assaulting a guy and choking a guy out in a coffee shop? There's reportedly video of the incident, and Alden Smith says he never laid a hand on the guy. So you would think that video would have been hashed out by now, and either he'd be charged and arraigned and released by the Seahawks or cleared up. But we'll see. Learning from the Quentin Dunbar situation the year before, sometimes these things take a while. But that's really the only question on the roster. It's set. So where does that roster rank in the NFC West, in my opinion? And just kind of as an overall view, if you listen to the show for very long, you know that at the beginning of the offseason, I was worried. No cap space, no draft picks, significant holes. What John Schneider's been able to do this offseason has been remarkable. Because there was a minute there in the height of all the Russell Wilson controversy, before the team started adding players, where you could make an argument the Seahawks were the fourth best roster in the NFC West. Certainly they were the third best at the beginning of the offseason. Questionable about whether the Cardinals would have been better. Now I put them second, but not by much. I put the Rams first, slightly. The edge goes to them because they have two elite defenders. Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, two best players in the league at their position. That's hard to beat. And they were able to bring Leonard Floyd back, and they have some other players on the defensive line, some good young linebackers. Major questions in the secondary, though, outside of Ramsey. They lost a lot in free agency. Questions along the offensive line. Stafford does make them better. Cam Akers makes them better. I don't think that's getting enough attention. What he did at the end of last season, looking like the bell cow featured back in that offense, that team hung on too long to Todd Gurley after his knees were clearly shot. And a dynamic do-it-all back like Cam Akers makes a huge difference in that offense. That offense could be scary if the offensive line holds up. So I still give them the edge, slightly. I put the Seahawks ahead of the 49ers basically because of the QB. If it's Garoppolo, then the Seahawks have a massive edge at quarterback. If it's Trey Lance, an even bigger edge because it's going to take him a while. Someone asked me what I think their record will be. I still have a hard time figuring it out, so it comes to 17 games. That's weird. So let's look at that real quick. First of all, a couple things that I believe. No team will sweep the division. I think this is going to be like a good conference in college where they're going to beat each other up. I think it's conceivable that every team in the NFC West could go 1-1 in the division. It's going to make it harder for a team to win 14 games, even 13 games. Now, Seahawks are at a disadvantage out of the gate. Those first 6 games are brutal. All quality opponents and only 2 at home. But here's the thing. Usually I worry about the Seahawks coming out of the gate. I worry that they'll be too conservative. Not sharp enough. Not executing well enough. Last year, they were at a huge disadvantage defensively because they didn't address the pass rush. And their big swing was bringing Jamal Adams in at the last minute, but there was no preseason. Took him a while to get going, then he got hurt. A lot of attention is being paid to how tough those first 6 games look, but with my optimistic colored lenses, I think that's going to cause the Seahawks to start the season with an edge, with something to prove, because they're going to hear it. They're already hearing it, but they're going to hear it a lot as the season gets closer. They're going to be asked about it. How are you going to get through those first 6 games? How are you going to get through all those road games? How are you going to get through all those good teams? I think the Seahawks are going to come out of the gate pissed, feeling disrespected with a chip on their shoulder. They have a little bit of an extra bullet in the chamber, though, too. Guy on Twitter tried to tell me a couple of weeks ago that a guy that covers the Colts, that he was happy to see the Seahawks as their opening game, that was a reasonably easy opener. Colts are the first team that's going to see the Seahawks with Shane Waldron running the offense. Remember how tough it was for the Seahawks facing the Bengals 2 years ago? First time with that offense. How vanilla and basic they played their defense and how scary that game was. The Seahawks are going to hear the noise, and I think they're going to want to shut it up. The consensus seems to be that if they can go 3-3 over that stretch, you're in good shape, because play only 2 of the first 6 at home, guess what? That evens out. In the second half of the schedule, there's some real advantageous, nice stretches there. Some home primetime games. Some nice little breaks. Your last 2 home games of the year, Detroit and Chicago. It's kind of weird, but could be advantageous. I say they find a way to go 4-2. I think this team will be counted out by many. I think they'll respond. I think they had a much better offseason than they're getting credit for. I think Russ will be on a mission to shut up all the noise of people that doubt him after the weird offseason. I think he has the best weapons he's ever had, the best offensive line he's ever had, the best scheme he's played in, the one that suits him the best. And I think this defense is much better suited to come out of the gate and be a solid defense. It's essentially the defense that ended last year, where they were a top 15 defense the second half of the season, and they added Kerry Hyder to it. Now, you can say they subtracted Shaquille Griffin, and it's a downgrade to Akello Witherspoon. We'll find out. But you just look at that pass rush. Compared to the beginning of last year, they should come out firing. You add Kerry Hyder, you add Carlos Dunlap to that. He didn't come along until midseason last year. You move LJ Collier into 3 technique. I think that's going to make him a weapon. You add a healthy Darrell Taylor, Alton Robinson with another year of experience. Maybe Alden Smith. I mean, this pass rush could be should be at least adequate, solid, could be dynamic. I think they go 12-5, and it remains to be seen whether that's good enough to win the division. I think it's going to be close. I think someone could win 13 games. That's a long season and a tough division. 12-5 could be good enough to win it. A couple odds and ends before we wrap things up today. We're going to talk some hockey over the next couple of months. And now the Seattle Kraken have their first player. It starts to get pretty fun over the next couple of months. He'll always be the answer to a trivia question. Luke Henman. Who is Luke Henman? The first Kraken player ever. 21-year-old center out of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. In the 2019-2020 season, he set career highs with 25 goals, 75 points in 63 games, and he was the team captain. Luke Henman is your first Kraken player. Many more players are going to be added over the next 2 months. The NHL draft lottery is June 2nd. That's when the Kraken will find out where they draft in the first round. They have a 10% chance to get the top pick. If that doesn't seem like a lot, they're considered the third seed, basically. So they have the third best chance of getting the top pick, but it's only a 10% chance. And then the expansion draft is July 21st, and then that actual draft is just a couple days after it, July 23rd and 24th. It's going to be fun. I got to brush up on my hockey. I got to brush up on my NHL. I'm excited for there to be a roster because that'll give me a couple of months to study it and learn the names and who these guys are and how to pronounce a lot of the names. But it'll be a lot of fun. Thanks for bearing with me over the last couple of weeks as I took a little time off. We'll be back on a regular basis now moving forward because I think things are going to start getting pretty interesting for the Mariners. I think we're going to see some of these young guys develop. We're going to see more of them being called up. You're going to see good stretches to go along with the bad. And I'm going to start getting to some games. Going to our first game on Sunday against the Rangers. I'll report on what I saw there. Not just the baseball game, but also the in-stadium experience as well. Going to get to some Everett and Rainier games also, and we'll start getting some guests back on. Due to have some guests back in the Emerald City Sportscast. Thank you for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Watch the YouTube channel. This episode is audio only, but I will typically live stream them or video them as well. Always when I have guests. And I have some pretty special guests lined up for the football season as well, including some national guys. So we have that to look forward to. Thanks for listening. I am Dan Viennes. We will see you next week on the Emerald City Sportscast.